Today's daf we're going to learn is Yoma daf ayin gimel. We're going to start at the bottom of ayin bet amud bet. As promised, we're going to start today the 8th parak of Yoma. Okay, we're starting from be'elu nishalim be'ulim v'tumim, 4 lines from the bottom of ayin bet amud bet. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar. When Rav Dimi came from Israel, if you remember, Rav Dimi and Ravin, who we're going to see in today's sugya, were 2 of the Nechuti, the people who would go from Israel to Babylonia and would pass the Torah of Eretz Israel to the Babylonians. When he came, he told us the following halacha. Begadim shekohen gadol meshamesh behem, meshuach melchama meshamesh behem. The kohen gadol wears the 8 clothing, the eight garments that we've been talking about. Those clothes are also worn by the kohen meshuach melchama, we'll talk about more today, when he works in the temple. Okay, how do we know this? The big day kodesh for Aaron are going to be for his sons after him. Now it sounds like this means just to his sons, but the way they darshan this, the way they learn it is the one who's below him in terms of the hierarchy. Who's directly below him? The kohen meshuach melchama. Let's talk about this kohen meshuach melchama. What is he? Who is he? What does he do? Why is he called meshuach and why is he called melchama? Meshuach, they're each 2 different terms. Meshuach means he is anointed with the oil, the shemen hamishcha. If you remember, we learned about the shemen hamishcha, which if you recall, we learned that toward the end of Bayit Rishon, first temple, they already hid it, right, with all those other things. There was shemen hamishcha left from the time of Moshe, and they hid it. No one ever used it after that. So he's called Meshuach Melchama. He was anointed with the oil, the shemen hamishcha, in order to go out to war with the people. He would be this person who would go out to war, and he would encourage the people during the time of war. He would also say to people, if there's someone who just built a new house and hasn't yet lived in it, there's someone who just got married, right? Or if there's someone who's scared and doesn't want to go out to war, you can go back home. Okay, there's certain exemptions for people, and he would kind of give this speech to encourage the people and also to say who's exempt from war. That was his job. Seems, according to Rav Dimi, that he also worked in the temple like a regular Kohen, but not exactly like a regular Kohen. Because he had this status, and he was a higher status of all the Kohanim, he also wore the 8 big day Kohen Gadol. Now you would imagine, which is interesting, we've always think of them as Kohen Gadol's clothes, but apparently he also got to wear them because he was similar to the Kohen Gadol in the sense that he was anointed. No one else was really anointed. He gets anointed, and he's a leader, right? He's considered this very important leader, and he wore the Kohen Gadol's clothes. Shuli Mishka wrote a really good article yesterday in Flashback about it, went up yesterday, about the Kohen Gadol's clothing. And one of the things she discusses there, which brings in some very interesting historical pieces and other. And one of the things she says is how impressive, she actually brings some source, I forgot the source where she brought it from, but how impressive it was. When someone would see the Kohen Gadol in his clothes, there was this, it was wow. People didn't dress like that. She said, first of all, colors, people didn't dress so much in colored clothing, only the wealthy. And this is a big issue. We're going to get to the jealousy soon. Anyway, therefore we say, according to Rav Dimi, he also wore those clothes, right? So you can imagine he's going out to war. He's supposed to be this person that's supposed to have presence, right? Like we saw in the Shimon HaTzadik story with Alexander Mokdon, this idea of the clothes were what really impressed people. So he also goes out wearing them. And not only does he go out wearing them, but what Rav Dimi says is farther than that. Everyone agrees, it seems, that he goes out to war wearing them. What he says is even when he's in the temple, then he wears the Shmona Begadim when he's working in the temple. So we're going to have 2 questions on Rav Dimi. First one, Mativ Rav Ada bar Ava. Rav Ada bar Ava brings the following source to question him. Some people say it was just asked about him, not necessarily the name of Rav Ada bar Ava. You might have thought that the job of Meshuach Melchama is hereditary. You get it from your father, passed down, dynastic, just like the Kohen Gadol is dynastic. Talmud Lamal, now they take this pasuk to say, for 7 days the Kohen Gadol is supposed to wear, right? Yobashem Kohen Tachtav mi banav. Asher Yavo al Ol Moed. What does this mean? Who's Asher Yavo al Ol Moed? In other words, the point of this verse is it's talking about the Banav Acharav, okay, basically the sons after him. Asher Yavo al Ol Moed, meaning who will have it dynastic that his sons go in his ways? the one who will go into Ol Moed. Now, we've been learning 7 chapters of Masechet Yoma. Who's the one who goes into Ol Moed? The one and only, the Kohen Gadol, right? So here you have it. It's dynastic only for the Kohen Gadol, not for the Mashuach Milchama. I see, Becky, you're asking, how did he get chosen? It's not actually clear from here. We don't really know how he gets chosen. At least I don't know. I didn't see any reference to it. So now, what do they say? Well, it's true that until now we've been learning Asher Yavo Ol Moed is the Kohen Gadol, and only the Kohen Gadol does this. But they say, who is this? Who does this include? Misha V'Oil Ol Moed. Okay, so that sounds like just the Kohen Gadol. But now they're going to say no. This sounds like also, if you're going to say, okay, let's go back to Rabbanit, that he can wear the Shmona B'gadim. What makes someone able to go into Ol Moed? The fact that he wears the Shmona B'gadim. In other words, is it the man makes the clothing makes the man. The fact that you're wearing Shmona B'gadim allows you to go into Kodesh Kodeshim. How do we know this? Well, look in Rashi. Rashi says, Vim Ita, the Shmona B'gadim, I'm on the second line of Rashi. If it's true, the Shmona B'gadim U'Mishamesh Kol HaShana, that whenever he's in the temple, the Kohen Mashuach wears the 8 clothings, the 8 garments, Hi Nami Michzachaze. Then he'll also be worthy of being a Kohen Gadol and going into Kodesh Kodeshim. How do we know? We learned this. Who gets the atonement on Yom Kippur? The one Asher Yimshach, who's anointed. Well, this guy was anointed, right? This Kohen Mashuach, Milchama, and Asher Yimalei Yado. Now, what is Miloi Yado? Kol Miloi Yadayim Al Yedei B'gadim Hu. Dechtiv B'B'dei Kodesh Asher L'Aaron, etc. There it says Miloi Yad. Therefore, anyone who wears the clothes and is anointed can go into Kodesh Kodeshim. So he also theoretically, now he's not going to, because really only the Kohen Gadol does. But if he wears the 8 garments when he goes and works in the temple, then he's got all the criteria to allow him to go into Ol Moed. In which case he should be included here, in which case it should be hereditary. And this source says it's not. So therefore, it must be he doesn't wear the 8 gadim. So here's our answer. You misunderstood that, Drasha. It's someone who is anointed specifically to be the Kohen Gadol, okay? Specifically to go into the Kodesh Kodeshim. It's true, he was anointed and he was anointed. He wears 8 garments, he wears 8 garments. But it has to be that you were anointed for a particular purpose. Anointing is for a purpose, right? You could be anointed to be a king. You could be anointed to be a Kohen Gadol. You could be anointed to be a Kohen Mashuach Milchama. So when it says Asher Yavo Ol Moed, it means who was anointed in order to go into Ol Moed, meaning the purpose of your job is to go into Ol Moed, and that's clearly not the purpose of the Mashuach Milchama. He might have all the criteria, check, check, check. Where's the 8 clothes? He was anointed, but it's not what the pasuk is saying. So that resolved question number 1. Question number 2 is going to take us a little bit longer because they're going to quote a very long source. But first, they're going to question it. They're going to answer it, and I'm going to have a difficulty with the answer. Mashuach Milchama eno meshamesh lo ba'arba'a ki kohen idiot, lo b'shmona ki kohen gadol. This tells us, it's a very strange source. It says he can't work in the temple, not with the 4 clothes of the regular Kohen, and not with the 8 clothes of the Kohen Gadol. Now, sounds like he can't work in the temple at all. Is that true? Mashuach Milchama doesn't work in the temple. Right? He can't work in the temple without the clothes. We already learned that, right? That the clothes is what allows you to atone. We just saw that. That's why they're called bigdei schad, right? Because because of them, there's a remnant of the Jewish people because they provide atonement, the clothes. So he can't work in the temple at all. So the simple reading of this is, yes, he can't work in the temple. Tosfot Yeshanim says that no, it means that if he's no longer able to go out to war, that's his main job, he's too old, let's say, he can't go out to war with them and be the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, at that point, he can no longer go into the temple and wear not the 4 clothes of the Kohen Idiot and not the 8 clothes of the Kohen Gadol, and that it's only referring to later. But it's not so clear what this really means. And maybe according to this, it sounds like he really didn't work in the temple at all. So it's a little bit, there's a lack of clarity here. Okay. I know in general in these things, we have lots of questions. What did, like for example, you were asking, how does he get appointed? There's all sorts of things they don't necessarily tell us, and we can only conjecture. So here there's different opinions about what this means. But in any case, let's try to understand. So if it says here, he didn't work in the Shmona B'gadim of the Kohen Gadol, then that clearly goes against Rav Dimi, who said he works in the 8 clothes. So how does Rav Dimi reconcile what he says with this Braita? So Amalei Abaye says, first of all, this source doesn't make any sense. Ela zar mishavet le. What, you're going to say he's like a non-Kohen because he can't wear 4 clothes, he can't wear 8 clothes. That sounds like he's a regular person. Of course, he's not a regular person. Ela ki kohen gadol mishum eva, ki kohen idiot mishum alim b'kodesh v'lo moridim. Theoretically, he really is a Kohen, and he really could work in the mikdash. And when I say theoretically, I mean by Torah law. Okay, and that's what Rav Dimi was referring to. By Torah law, he can wear the 8 begadim. What's the problem? And this is what you said before, Becky. The rabbis instituted that he cannot wear the Shmona begadim. Why? Because it's going to create jealousy. The Kohen Gadol is going to get jealous that there's someone else, right? When you're wearing the fancy clothes, you're the one, and then all of a sudden there's someone else. That's going to be very difficult in the temple. At the Mashuach Melchama, even if he wore the 8 clothes in the temple, he was a regular guy, really, a regular Kohen, because where's his prestige? When he goes out to war, he's the main person. Makes sense. He wears the Shmona begadim there. But in the temple, it's going to create jealousy. And this goes back to, again, nice that we're ending this whole section with, again, talk of where we started in the beginning of the Masechet, with all the jealousy and all the issues that could possibly come up, and how the rabbis said, well, we need to avoid this, so let's come up with ways we can avoid this. So they said, even though theoretically he could wear the Shmona begadim, he doesn't because it'll create jealousy. The 4 begadim, why can't he wear? Because of this concept of malim b'kodesh v'lo moridim. You can only go up. Once you wear the 8 garments, you can't wear less than that. It's not respectful to you. So therefore, right, and you always go up in kodesh, you never go down, so he can't wear the 4. So he ends up, he can't do anything, right? But not really by law. By law, it's really okay. But the rabbis changed the law and said, listen, we have to prepare for all sorts of eventualities. This might cause jealousy, therefore, sorry, but you can't. Okay, which shows the importance of the Kohen Gadol, that we can basically not allow this person to do work in the temple just so that he doesn't create jealousy between him and the Kohen Gadol. That's how far they went. So now that's our answer. So our answer is really Rav Dimi's right, mi'ikar hadin, as we say, by the letter of the law, by the Torah law. But the rabbis changed it and they said, well, we're not going to let him. So Amalei, and that's because there's a connection. We're making a clear connection between the fact that he doesn't wear Shmona begadim and the issue of Eva. So now, but I'm going to show you a source where the concept of him not wearing 8 clothes and jealousy don't go together. Meaning, I'm going to show you a source that shows we're not concerned for jealousy in the temple. And it's also going to say he doesn't wear the 8 garments, which means that those two are not connected like you just tried to connect them. It's going to take us a little while to get here. It's nice about this source is it's going to set up the whole difference between different types of Kohanim. We're going to see all different types and compare the laws for each one. So it's going to make Seder for us. Okay, it's not the reason why they brought it directly, because they brought it just to show this one thing. But from here, we're going to learn all sorts of things. And by the way, the vlog of Rabbanit, Shiur, and Chamutal this week is all about the issue of Kohanim in general, what laws that relate to Kohanim, what's still relevant today, etc. So now here goes. Here's our list. Ditanya. Dvarim shebein. Okay, I'll remind you at the end why we got here. So in the meantime, let's just be in this source and understand the difference. Dvarim shebein kohen gadol kohen hedyot. The first thing we're going to compare a regular kohen gadol to a regular kohen hedyot. Okay, the kohen gadol. I say regular because we're going to see all sorts of other kohanim gadolim, but a kohen gadol to a regular kohen. First is we're going to skip the first 3 words because Rashi and the Gra take them out because it's really the same as the next one. Par habal kol mitzvot. The first is that there's a special bull offering. We've seen this. It's called the Par Kohen HaMashuach. Now, I want you not to confuse the Par Kohen HaMashuach with the Mashuach Melchama. Kohen HaMashuach is a Kohen that's anointed. Okay, meaning he was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha and that turned him into a Kohen. That's different from the Mashuach Melchama because he was anointed to be the person to go out to war. So when we talk about the Par Kohen HaMashuach, we're talking about a par that relates to the Kohen Gadol. It's an offering the Kohen Gadol brings in the case where he teaches something incorrectly, okay, and then he follows his incorrect teaching. If he does that, he has to bring a special bull offering, right? He makes a mistake, but it was a mistake he has to bring. Normally, when someone makes a mistake, they bring a korban chatat, a regular korban chatat. He has a special one, just like the Nasi has a special one, just like the whole community does something, they have a special one. That's the Par Lem Davar Shel Tzibur. He has a special offering. It's called the Par Kohen HaMashuach or the Par Habal Kol HaMitzvot. It all means the same thing. That's why there's really only one here. Only the Kohen Gadol does this. A Kohen Idiot, who teaches something incorrectly, doesn't bring that. And in fact, we're going to learn a Kohen who wasn't anointed for whatever reason also doesn't bring it because it says they're Mashuach. Okay, it has to be a Kohen that was anointed. Upar Yom Kippurim. Okay, that's everything we've been learning, right? The bull offering on Yom Kippur, remember, is the bull offering for the Kohen Gadol. Only he brings that, not a Kohen Idiot. Basiri Taifa, if you remember, he brings every day, twice a day, a Minchat Chavitin, this meal offering, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. That is brought by the Kohen Gadol. Remember, both those he pays out of pocket. Look, now we're going to get to, those are things he's supposed to bring, offerings. Now we're going to get to another category, which is all sorts of things that are forbidden for him to do. Lo polei, he can't grow his hair long. Lo polem, he doesn't tear his clothes when a relative dies. Aval polemu milamata. By the way, he does do kriya. He just doesn't do it from the top. We normally do kriya from the top. He does it from the bottom of his garment, okay, like in a less noticeable place. V'heidyot milamala. But a regular Kohen does it from the top. He can't become impure to his relatives. Right? All his close relatives is not allowed to go to the cemetery. He's not allowed to become impure. He has a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment to marry someone who's a virgin. And he's forbidden to marry a widow. These kind of go together, but one is a positive commandment, one is a negative. If he dies, then all the people who flew to the Ir Miklat, remember the refuge city, all get to go free because his death atones for them. And then we're going to see that now we have all these laws. There's going to be a few things here that are actually the same as the Kohen Idiot, but they bring them because the beginning is different. Onain, makriv onain. If he's onain, meaning one of his close relatives die, he still stays in the temple and does the work. Okay, does the avoda. That's different from a regular Kohen who basically leaves the temple. But here we get to something similar. Eino ochel, he can't, even though he's an onain and he still needs to work in the temple, since he's an onain. Remember, an onain is when someone dies before they're buried, one of your close relatives dies. Eino ochel, he can't eat any of the meat. Ve'eino cholek, and he doesn't get a portion of the meat even to eat, let's say, tomorrow when he's no longer an onain. Those two things are true for a regular Kohen. The main difference is he sacrifices and he's working in the temple and still doesn't eat and doesn't get a portion, as opposed to the other Kohanim who don't work in the temple and also don't receive a portion and don't eat. They can get any portion they want. Normally, the meats are divided up by all the Kohanim. We're now moved off the topic of onain, just in general, the meat of the temple. Normally, when you work your week, you get to eat the food. And you split it between all the Kohanim. He can take whichever one he wants first, and he can decide, I want to do this sacrifice. He could say, come in and say, I'm eating this sacrifice. I'm going to sacrifice this person's korban. He can choose whatever he wants. He wears 8 garments. Okay, we've learned this before, that if you come in tamei to the temple, by accident, or you didn't know it was forbidden to come in when you were tamei, or something about Tumah and the Mikdash, you bring what's called a korban olevi yolev. It depends, right? It's a sliding scale. Depending on how wealthy you are, that affects which kind you bring. He's actually exempt from this. It comes up in Masechet Horayot. We'll learn when we get there why he's exempt from this korban. So if he accidentally comes into the temple impure, doesn't bring the sacrifice. Okay, this is a nice summary, right? Everything we've just been talking about, he has to do everything. That's all the Kohen Gadol, a regular Kohen Gadol. All these are true for, now we're on Kohen Gadol number 2. This was someone who was anointed as a Kohen, okay? Anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. What if you weren't anointed with Shemen HaMishcha? Let's say after the end of Bayit Rishon, when there was no more, end of the first temple, there's no more oil to anoint them. So what do? He wears 8 garments, and that's his initiation. That makes him the Kohen Gadol. It's called Kohen Merubeh Begadim. He became the Kohen Gadol because he wore the clothes. Obviously, you can't just wear the clothes to become the Kohen Gadol, right? It has to be, you were the one chosen to be the Kohen Gadol. Again, it was hereditary, right? When in the Yerusha, it was passed down. In any case, what happens here? He takes, right? He puts on the clothes. He becomes the Kohen Gadol, not because he was anointed. So there's one thing from that list that's going to drop, as I told you. It was called the Par Kohen HaMashuach. Now he's not Mashuach, so he doesn't bring that par anymore. That law is just for Kohen who was anointed. So therefore, so that par he doesn't bring. He would just be like a regular individual when it came to that offering. Bikulano ago, okay, category number 3, Mashuach Sha'aval, a Kohen who was a Kohen Gadol and is now no longer a Kohen Gadol. Right? When I remember this doesn't really happen in shuls in Israel so much, but in America, maybe in some shuls, not in the ones I'm used to, but in America, when I was growing up, there was always on the podium there sitting, there was the rabbi and there's the rabbi emeritus, right? We have the rabbi who used to be the rabbi, right? And in general, when I was growing up, I remember he didn't do so much, but he sat there in a respectful position, right? We didn't, just because he's no longer the rabbi, doesn't mean that we kick him out and just put him, sits like everybody else. No, he stays with his, status. So therefore, all these things are still true b'mashuach sha'aval. Chutz mi, okay, there's just a few things that he doesn't do. What is it? Par Yom Kippurim v'asiri ta'ifa. Okay, now, he doesn't have the Par Yom Kippurim, and he doesn't have the asiri ta'ifa. Why? Well, that's something that's only for the Kohen who's operational. So let's say we take that rabbi, right? He'll do all the jobs of a rabbi. He just doesn't give the drasha, let's say, because there's someone else to give the drasha, right? You wouldn't give the drasha in shul. You wouldn't speak in shul because someone else is speaking, right? So the Par Yom Kippurim and Nasirit Haifa are things given to the operating Kohen and not one who is no longer operational. Bikulan eino hagopa b'shuach milchama. Now we get to the Mashuach Milchama. Chutz mi chamisha dvarim ha'amurim b'parasha. Okay, these are not for the Mashuach Milchama. None of these things. Okay, until now we basically have everything is true except for. Okay, I see someone's asking, how do you no longer be a Kohen Gadol? So the truth is, I think that is something that changed over time. I think it used to be, for the most part, you would die, right? And then remember, we had the 80 years one, and Shimon HaTzadik was 40 years, but then things changed toward the end of Bayit Sheni, if you remember, and then people would buy their way into the kahuna, and it became a whole different thing. So then they ended up with a lot of Kohanim Gedolim because they would buy their way in, and it would usually be for a year or so. They wouldn't last. So then you ended up with all these Kohanim Gedolim. It's actually a strange situation. We have so many people who had once been Kohanim Gedolim. So I think it was different in different time periods. I don't think there's any real criteria. I think ideally it's supposed to be until you die, but things changed over time, and depending on who was in charge and how things went about, and everything kind of switched, and the appointment process became different, which also meant who leaves became different. Okay, next. So Kulan ain't no hagop Mashuach Milchama. Mashuach Milchama doesn't have most of these things, except for Chutz mechamishat dvarim hamurim b'parasha, right? The parasha where it talks about all the criteria, what's unique about a Kohen Gadol. Those things are true also for Kohen HaMashuach. Okay, Mashuach Milchama, the one who goes out to war, which is, except for one, by the way, there's one missing here, but all the ones listed there in the Torah where it talks about this, Lo porea v'lo porem, he can't grow his hair long, he can't tear kriya on his relatives, Lo metameh lekrovav, he can't become impure to his relatives, Umitzuvel abtula umuzhar lamana, he has to marry a virgin, he can't marry a widow, Umachzir et harotzeach kedivrei Rabbi Yehuda v'chachamim omrim eino machzir. There's a debate only about Ir Miklat. Does the death of the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, does it also atone for all the people who ran away to this Ir Miklat, refuge city, because they killed someone accidentally, or not? So basically, there's a machloket about that. Does it work or not? The one thing that's missing here that was written in that section in the Torah and Vayikra is the one about Onain. Doesn't say here Onain. So it seems that he wouldn't work in the temple if he was an Onain. That one's not listed here. So now, you have to remember why we got here. I knew you'd forget by now. What was the reason? We wanted to show that this source seems to show there's no connection between him not wearing the clothes and Eva and the jealousy. How do we know that? Well, I highlighted on the sheet, so if you have the sheet, you can see. When it talks about the former Kohen Gadol, it says he wears the Shmona Begadim. If he wears the Shmona Begadim, that means that we don't have to worry about jealousy. Right? You don't have to worry that we kept that rabbi up on the podium and the other rabbi is going to be jealous of him, right? If you did worry about that, you make that rabbi sit back in the community so that you show who's in charge, if you're worried about jealousy. So clearly this Braita is not concerned about jealousy. And yet it says the Kohen Mashuach Milchama doesn't wear the 8 garments. So if you tried to prove the reason he doesn't wear the 8 garments is because of Eva, which then proved Rav Dimi that Rav Dimi was really talking about by Torah law, he would wear the 8 garments. It's just the rabbis instituted not because of jealousy. That doesn't match the source. Well, maybe it does. The Gemara is going to now explain it. Now, this is a good, again, insight into human behavior. Who's going to create a bigger threat to the Kohen Gadol? Okay, a former Kohen Gadol or a Kohen Mashuach Melchama is operational right now. So comes the Gemara and they say, someone who's at his level, okay, but no longer, let's say, operational. They don't say the operational part, but basically at his level, that's not threatening. The fact that we're going to treat another rabbi with respect is not going to threaten the current rabbi, right? He's a rabbi. It actually is good for him. It means when I stop being a rabbi, they'll respect me too. But with someone below him that's now going to be treated as if he has the same status and wear the same clothes as me, that's more of a threat to him. Like then that person he's going to be jealous with. Why are you giving him the fancy clothes that I wear? I'm at this level. He's at that level. He shouldn't be wearing it. And that will create jealousy. Well, maybe you could make a claim the other way, but right, someone lower you, you're not really worried. Someone who was at your level and was a Kohen Gadol might want to come back. Right? You think about politics, right? Someone who used to be the prime minister might want to come back, or president, right? Might want to come back to be the president. They're your biggest threat. Anyway, I'm not going to get into politics today. So, but one can think about that. So now that's our answer. Yativ Rabbi Yavau. Okay, we're done. We're almost done with Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi said, let's just go back. Basically, what we had is 2 questions on Rav Dimi today, and we answered both questions. Rav Dimi said the Kohen Mashuach Melchama wears the 8 clothes when he's working in the temple. Yativ Rabbi Yavau, the Ka'amar la lahashmat mishnei to Rabbi Yochanan. The same thing Rav Dimi said, Rabbi Yavau said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ahadrinu Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi la'pai. When they heard this, they turned their faces away. They said, no way did Rabbi Yochanan ever say that. Not possible. So what did they do? Instead of saying, that's not true, they just turned their faces away. Okay, we'll see why in a minute, right? Obviously, they didn't want to say to him, you're wrong. Maybe they had a certain amount of respect for him, but they also didn't want to show that they believed what he was saying, so they turned their faces the other way. Some people say it was Rabbi Shiur bar Abba Amara. He was the one who said it, not Rabbi Yavau. And then they turned their faces away from him. So Rav Papa says, Bishlama Rabbi Yavau, I understand Rabbi Yavau was very respected by the Caesar. He was the Roman emperor. He was very respected. Therefore, I understand why they might say anything to him, right? They could get in trouble maybe, or he was a person who commanded a lot of respect, and therefore they didn't want to turn their face away. They didn't want to tell him directly, sorry, they just turned their face away. If it was Rabbi Shiur bar Abba, they should have just said, Rabbi Yochanan never said that. So therefore it seems that it was really Rabbi Yavau who said it and not Rabbi Shiur bar Abba. Next, that was all Rav Dimi. And then maybe Rabbi Yochanan said it, seemingly he didn't. Ki'ata Ravin, but when Ravin came from Israel, he said the following. Amar Nish'al Itmar. The same statement he says, except instead of using the words when he worked in the temple, he uses the words when he asked meaning what? Asked the Urim v'Tumim. Apparently the Kohen Mashuach Melchama, because he was the Kohen who was working in war, often in times of war, they went to check with the Urim v'Tumim. Should we go out to war? So when he asks the Urim v'Tumim, he wears the Shmona Bagadim. And then not when he works in the temple, and then that resolved all our questions. What do you mean? He didn't wear the Shmona Bagadim and all that. So that resolves all the questions against Rav Dimi, according to Ravin's understanding, because it had nothing to do with working in the temple. Tanya Nami Hachi, and there's a brighter to support this. The same clothes that the Kohen Gadol wears in the temple to work, the Mashuach Melchama wears when he asks the Urim v'Tumim. And now we're going to get into this whole thing of the Urim v'Tumim, although we're still not going to really get a description, right? I'm sure you're all wondering, how did the Urim v'Tumim work? We're going to get some answers, but not 100% about how exactly the whole thing worked. Tanu Rabbanan. Urim v'Tumim is a very strange thing. Okay, we're going to see, comes from these stones. Okay, the stones, I'll kind of I'll talk about things we're going to get to. Okay, if you can see the picture in the video, there's the 12 stones on the Choshen, and each one, I don't know if you can really see here, has a name of one of the tribes engraved into the stone. Okay, and we'll see maybe there were other things engraved as well, according to the Gemara. So Tanu Rabbanan, Ketzad Shoalim, how do you ask? So Shoel Panav Klapei Nishal. If I'm the one asking the Kohen Gadol to ask, or the Kohen Mashuach Melchama to ask the Urim v'Tumim a question, I look at them directly in the face when I ask. V'anish'al panav klapei Shechina, and the Kohen Gadol looks directly down at the Choshen, okay, for where the Shechina is supposedly. Hashoel Omer. Now they're going to basically learn all sorts of things of the Urim v'Tumim from where? From the prophets. In the books of prophets, there's all sorts of times where they go and consult with the Urim v'Tumim. That's where we're going to get our information. We're taking this from David HaMelech. David asked God, should I go run after this dude, this army? And the one who answered is told, okay, you can go, right? God said, now this is interesting. This isn't what it says there in David. This is quoted from a different part where Achav asks, and he's told, and he's not told, Hashem. He's told, and God will give them into your hands, go to war. Okay, but here yet Hashem, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein tzarich lomar Hashem ela alev hatzlach. The answer doesn't have to be Hashem, God said. Right? Maybe it's obvious God said it, and also he's basing it on the Navi who didn't use the words Hashem. Right? And obviously the first opinion is saying, no, you have to say God said, so that it's very clear that this is a message from God. The other one says you don't need to. You could just say, go up and you will win. You don't ask, when the Kohen asks the question, the Kohen Gadol, he says it quietly, not out loud. Says he asks for him, basically, which means just he hears it. But he doesn't just say it in his mind. Okay, we're going to have to understand. So what does he do? And here they don't quote the important part of the pasuk. It then says, al piv yetzu, al piv yavo, based on his mouth, meaning he has to mouth the words. So what do we say? Just like we say about Chana in her prayer, that right? She spoke in her heart, right? Just her lips moved. In other words, like the way we daven Shemona Esrei, where our lips move, but you don't hear the words. Another rule, you can't ask two questions at once. And we're going to prove from David that he did, and we'll see what happens. If you did ask two questions, you're only going to get one answer. And you're only going to get the answer to the first question. By the way, I just wanted to say here, this thing about Erdof Acharei Agdud Hazeh, and then David asked Ha'asigenu, or the words Erdof Asig, which we say in Shiur, Erdof Asig Achalek Shalal. I was thinking it's a similar wording that he uses. Anyway, totally non sequitur, but I thought it was interesting. So you can't ask two things at once. And if you do, you're only going to get one answer. How do we know? And which one? You're only going to get an answer to your first question. So where do we get this from? Shenema, another time David consulted with the Urim V'Tumim. He asked, Hayazgireni ba'alei ki'ilah biyado, are the people of Ki'ilah, when he was running away from Shaul HaMelech, he says, are the people of Ki'ilah going to tell Shaul where I am, about my whereabouts? Hayered Shaul, is Shaul going to go to Ki'ilah? Now something's a little bit strange here, because shouldn't he say, is Shaul going to go to Ki'ilah? And then he should say, and are the people in Ki'ilah going to tell him where I am? So something's a little odd here. We'll get to that in a minute. Vayomer Hashem yered. And what does God answer? He doesn't answer both questions. He just says Shaul is going to go down. There's a bit of a problem here. We just said, you're only going to get one answer, and it's going to be the answer to your first question. But actually, there's an answer to the second question. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask. So what do they answer? David sha'al shelo kaseder, v'chziru lo kaseder. He asked the question out of order. He should have asked, the way I said, will Shaul go down to Ki'ilah? And if he does, will they tell him where I am? Now, you need to know is the next verse. So basically, the first verse is David says, are the people of Ki'ilah going to give me over to Shaul? And will Shaul go to Ki'ilah? The answer he gets is, he's going. Then the next verse is, Vayomer David, hayazgiru ba'alei Ki'ilah oti. He again repeats that first question. Will they turn me in? Bet anashai biyad Shaul, right, and my people to Shaul. Vayomer Hashem yazgiru, and God says they will. So now, what does the Gemara say? Well, that's why he repeats it, because he realized he said it out of order, and he realized he only got an answer to one question. So then he asked the second question a second time, and then he gets right, which is really his first question, but it should have been his first. It should have been his second question. So he gets the answer. Let's just go back to the beginning. He gets an answer for the question that should have been his first question, that logically was his first question, even though it's not the way he asked it. Then he asks his first question, which was really his second question. He asks the second time after he only gets an answer to the first. So that's how you learn. Only ask one question at a time. And if you do, right, we learn from David's mistakes. And if you do, right, ask two, you're only going to get the answer to the first. Okay, that's how they prove it. But there's an exception to this rule. If often you're about to go out to war and you need an answer immediately. So therefore, we're going to say, if that's the case, then you can ask for 2 and you'll get 2 right away. How do we know? This is what we saw before. Can I chase after them and will I succeed? And he gets an answer about both. Yes, go, and you will succeed. Something God tells a prophet can be overturned. Saw this with Nineveh and the Sefer of the book of Yoma, but the Urim v'Tumim will never be changed. If God gives an answer, that's what it's going to be. How do we know? Shenemar b'mishpat ha'urim. A mishpat is final, even though we know you can always appeal, but in this case, a ruling is final. The lama, and that's because it's called b'mishpat ha'urim. This is when it describes the Urim v'Tumim and Sefer Bamidbar. It calls it b'mishpat ha'urim. Therefore, it's final. Lama nikra shman Urim v'Tumim. Why is it called Urim v'Tumim? Urim shemi'irim et divreihem. It lights up their words, meaning it makes things clear. Take something where you don't know, and it makes it very clear. Tumim shemashlimim et divreihem. They finalize their words, meaning it's not only clear, but it's complete. Okay, and it's very clear. So they're kind of one and the same. V'itema b'giv'at binyamin. If you remember at the end of Sefer Shoftim, we have this whole thing about Pilegesh b'giv'ah. Took this woman, they chopped her up into pieces, right, and all this stuff. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the whole story, but there they end up in a civil war. The Binyamins against everybody else. So b'giv'at binyamin b'pnei ma lo ishlimu. In this case, they were told, they went to the Urim v'Tumim 3 times. They said, who should go first? And they said, Yehuda. So Yehuda goes to fight first. Then it says, should we go? And God says, yes. Both the first 2 times, they end up getting killed. It's not a big success. They don't win the war. Only the 3rd time, and we'll see that verse inside, they're going to darshan from that verse, why the 3rd time were they successful? And why the first 2 times God said go, and it really wasn't a good idea to go. So, and we'll see what the Gemara says, and I'll give you something one of the Mefarshim says there. Okay, in other words, not everybody agrees with this interpretation. This is why the 3rd time they actually won. So now they say, Heim shelo bichanu im linatzech, im linatzech, uba'achrona shebachanu hiskimu. The first time they said, should Yehuda go? They didn't say, should we go out to war? Are we going to succeed? They just said, should Yehuda, who should go first? I'm sorry. So who should go first? And he says Yehuda. Then they said, should we go? But they didn't say, are we going to win? Right? Like David said, should we go? Or are we going to win? They didn't say, should we go? Or are we going to win? Only the 3rd time, Shne'emar, so fine. They said, should we go? God said, fine, go. But they didn't say, are we going to win? Right? They didn't say it right. And Pinchas ben Elazar was standing before them that day, on those days. And he said, that was their question. Should we go out to fight or should we stop? Okay, now we're ready. Should we go or should we stop is already, are we going to win or not? That time they get an answer, a full answer, a complete answer. God says, go and I will give them into your hands, meaning you will win. But until that point, not. So the Gemara says the reason is because they didn't ask properly. They didn't say, give both options. They just said, should we go? God said, fine, go. Some people say it's the Pinchas only appeared in the scene on the 3rd one, because you see, they start talking about Pinchas here. It means they didn't ask Pinchas before, and maybe they didn't ask the right Kohen. And the fact that he asked Pinchas maybe means that Pinchas told them, look, you're not asking your question in the proper way. And he fixed the question. And that's why maybe they were answered the 3rd time. Anyway, there's debate about why. Our Gemara gives one reason. How does it work? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Boltot. The letters of the answer kind of jump out of the Choshen. And then the Kohen has to order them. It's like word scramble. Okay, he's got to scramble the letters. Rish Lakish Amar mitzarfot. No, they jump out and they mix up and they get in the order of exactly what you're looking for. V'halok tibut tzadi, but there's no tzadi. So first of all, how could you say alev atzlach? There's no tzadi, right? Which means go and you'll be successful. There's no tzadi in any of the letters of the Shvatim. So what do they answer? Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Tivshan. That's why I told you before. It's not necessarily just the names of the Shvatim. Somehow Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were also written there. V'halok tiv tet. Doesn't say tet. Amaravacha bar Yaakov, and by the way, there's some other letters. Chet and kuf don't appear, but those appear in Yitzchak, so you're fine once you have that. What about tet, which doesn't appear in Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov either? So they say Shiftei Yeshurun K'tiv Sham. There's a whole debate about where these extra words are written. Some people say on the first stone, it also added Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, and on the last one, Shiftei Yeshurun. There's other opinions about how exactly. Some people say the letters were just interspersed all throughout somehow. Okay, Meitive. Kol Kohen, but now we have a question on Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. It says, it seems like the answer is kind of just given to you. Maybe you have to scramble it a little, but it's basically right there. Kol Kohen she'eino medaber b'ruach hakodesh u'shchina shora alav ein shoalim bo. You can't ask the Urim V'Tumim unless you have Ruach HaKodesh. You have to be a Kohen who's a Navi also. Okay, which, by the way, is not so easy to find. But you have to have Ruach HaKodesh. You might say, what do you need the Urim V'Tumim for if you have Ruach HaKodesh? It's basically prophecy in a different form. So I thought of a difference, that prophecy comes when God decides to give you a prophecy. But Urim V'Tumim is you're asking God to give you a prophecy. Okay, so maybe that's why. So Kol Kohen, unless, right, and Shoalim. Sharei Sha'al Tzadok, Ba'altalo, Evyatar V'lo Altalo, Shenemar V'yal Evyatar, Alton Kol Am. I'm not going to get into the details because it's late already, but there's a whole story there where he goes to Evyatar. Evyatar doesn't get the answer. So David goes to Tzadok. So what do they ask? So here you see, not everybody's worthy, and maybe Evyatar didn't have Ruach HaKodesh. So they say, Siyua, and so how can it be the letters come out? It doesn't matter who you are, it sounds like it's the Urim B'Tumim that are doing all the work. So they say, Siyua have a Messiah b'Hadayu. It's some sort of combination. And maybe that whole thing about the word scramble, he has to be able to read it. It wasn't like it was just obvious that anyone can come by and understand it. Some combination of the person asking and the Urim B'Tumim, okay, which a little bit lowers the magical nature of this Urim B'Tumim, right? If you view prophecy as not as magical, but it's also kind of out there, but it's some sort of combination of man and this miracle. You can only ask for a king, Minan Emile, or an Av Beitin at the head of the Sanhedrin, or for the whole community. How do you know this? Amar Rabbi Abaud, Amar Cha. This is the pasuk that describes the Urim V'Tumim in Sefer Bamidbar. V'lifnei Elazar Kohen Yamod, you'll stand before Elazar the Kohen, v'sha'alo b'mishpat ha'urim, and he'll ask, v'gomer, and then it says at the end of that pasuk, Hu v'chol Yisrael ito v'chol ha'edah. So who is the king? Kol Yisrael ito is Meshuach Melchama, and Kol ha'edah is the Sanhedrin, and that's where we learn that those are the people you can ask for. And with this, Hadran alach balo Kohen Gadol. And I'm not going to say this again because I kind of said it already, but I'll at least make reference to the fact that we've now finished all the Avodat Kohen Gadol. If you want to, the take home from all this is, number one, we'll understand our tefillah much better on Yom Kippur this year, God willing. Number two, we've also taken a whole perspective on interpersonal relationships and how much they played a role in the temple and how it was used as a way of teaching us in general about human relationships and what we should be aware of, whether it's make sure not to do something that will cause jealousy, what you do if something goes wrong, what if you make a mistake, how do you pick up the pieces, all sorts of different things that we saw about both interpersonal relationships and just ourselves doing something important and all the things that could possibly go wrong and how the temple made all sorts of adaptations for that. And yes, thanks, Tova. Also, God willing, when we have a Beit HaMikdash, right? Nobody really knows what will be then, whether we will actually have sacrifices, won't have sacrifices, but either which way, some of the things that we did will be incorporated there, maybe all of them, so also useful for that. With that, we're going to start our new chapter. Yoma Kippurim, Asur ba'achila, the one we've been waiting for. Asur ba'achila, b'shtiya, b'rechitza, b'sicha, b'nilata, sandalu, b'tashmish hamita. On Yom Kippur, you can't eat, you can't drink. That's considered one. There's 5 inuyim, they call them. In the Torah, it never says you can't eat, drink, any of these things on Yom Kippur. It says, ta'anu nafshotechem, torture your soul. So what does that mean? So they interpret, means no eating, no drinking, no bathing, no anointing with oil, no shoes, right? Usually we say leather shoes, no tashmish hamita, no sexual relationships or relations. So, big debate. Are all of these asur from the Torah? Or only some of them? Is it only eating and drinking asur from the Torah? The Rambam says they're all forbidden by Torah law. The Ran and others say, no, they're not all forbidden by Torah law. And the proof is the next line. Okay, first of all, there's a debate about what exactly Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis debate. Is it just the chaya, which is a woman who just gave birth, is allowed to wear shoes? She might catch a cold. Is the debate about that where the chachamim say no? Or do the chachamim say no to all three? That a king can wash his face, and that's because a king has to always look presentable. And a kala, also a bride, can wash her face. Okay, what's a bride? I always laugh because my father-in-law still calls me a bride to this day. I just celebrated my 23rd anniversary yesterday. Still calls me that my husband's bride. But a bride here is considered for 30 days. So for the first 30 days, the idea is that That's when, she wants to be as much beloved to her husband as she can, so she can actually wash her face. So the Ran says, here's your proof. If it was Asr Mida Oraita, for sure we wouldn't allow this. But, right, that's one way of looking at it. But so what is the Rambam? How would he explain it? So they say, well, Inoi is what's the opposite of Inoi? Pleasure. Now, these people are not doing it for pleasure. The woman's wearing shoes because she's going to get sick. The king and the bride are doing it for other reasons. They're not doing it because they want to feel good that they wash their face. They're doing it for other reasons. It doesn't even fall into the category. So you could see it like that, which is very interesting, because then obviously you can take that much farther. Oh, for me, it's not pleasurable, but anyway, these are the exceptions. What's the shiur of eating that's going to make you obligated? So it's a date with the pit. And if you drink a full mouthful. Any kind of food, you eat a little bit of this, a little bit of that, it can add up to the requisite amount, but food and drink can't combine. So the Gemara says, asul, 1 minute. Yoma Kippurim asul, if it's karet, you get karet for this. It should say, you get karet. Usually that's what it says. So, anush karetu, it should say asul. So, now we're going to get into this whole topic, which we'll just mention today, but we'll get into it further on, which is chatzi shiur. What does it mean, chatzi shiur? If I eat, it means half. If I eat half the requisite amount or anything less than the amount, which is the date and its pit, then is it forbidden by Torah law? So if I eat a little bit on Yom Kippur, but I don't eat a requisite amount, is that forbidden by Torah law? I'm not going to get karet, but is it forbidden? There's a whole debate about it. So basically what it's saying is you can't eat even a little bit. And that's asr from the Torah. So that works if you say this asr from the Torah. But what if you hold that it's not asr min Torah? And how do we know there's a debate? The Itmar, it was said. So therefore, Rish Lakish doesn't make any sense because he says it's not asr. So asr in our Mishnah can't mean chatzi shiur. To which the Gemara is going to say, Modeh Rish Lakish asur midrabanan. When it says asr, first we saw asr meant karet. Now we're going to say no, asr doesn't mean karet. Asr means it's forbidden even to eat, even though you're not going to get punished for it. Right? There's things that you don't get punished for; they're still going to be forbidden. Tomorrow we'll see why Rabbi Yochanan holds us, why Rish Lakish holds us. According to Rish Lakish, chatzi shiur isn't asr min Torah, but it is asr on a rabbinic level. And the Mishnah was talking on a rabbinic level. It's forbidden to eat any amount, even though you're not going to get punished for it, even though it's not forbidden by Torah law. By rabbinic law, you can eat any amount. Okay, we'll get back to this whole topic over time. Also, what about if you're pregnant and you need to eat, or you're sick and you can eat less than the requisite amount? But that's a different story. That's an exception to the rule. But in general, the question of chatzi shiur, it's a very interesting topic, and we'll delve more into it later, tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everyone.